Why jazz?
Well, I've had a lifelong interest in jazz. It's a long-term romance, as you might say. When I was a student back in the 70s, I got interested in music, but that was rock music. And I liked the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and so on. But as I listened to it more and more, I found it less satisfying. I mean, there was some very good music there, but there was some that was pretty mediocre. The standard varied a lot. And some music was just great tunes, but not much more than that. Anyway, I made some friends at university, and they were guys who were actually into jazz, and they told me about the ABC's jazz programs, which were quite prolific then. So I tuned in and started listening, and I was hooked for life.
So who is your favorite jazz musician?
Well, that's a tough one because everyone in the book is a favorite in some way, but I guess there are some musicians that when I listen to them again, um, that's not the audience applauding me, by the way, that's the music. Um, but there are some musicians that when I listen to them, I still have that reaction, wow, that's exceptional. And I guess the ones that I would put in that category are Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker, and John Coltrane.
Like these musicians for your book.
Um, it was very much a personal matter. They're all musicians who I think have something original and compelling to say, I guess. There are a lot of other talented musos out there, but a lot I admitted just because basically it's a personal thing and they didn't give me the buzz that those I wrote about got from their music.
Now, many of the musicians that you've written about had short, tragic lives, mainly due to substance abuse. Why do you think this was the case?
It's something that really jumped out at me as I wrote the book. That I did a count it once, and the great majority that I read about had drug or alcohol problems. As a friend of mine who read the draft for me said, to be a great jazz musician, do you have to have a nickname and a substance abuse problem? Well, I guess the jazz lifestyle was very tough, particularly for the black musicians who had to endure intolerable, unexcusable racism. It's like the story of Billie Holiday when she's playing with Artie Shaw's white band. When they were staying at a New York hotel, the band could use the main elevator. Billie Holiday had to go upstairs in the service elevator. So there were those constant slights. But it was also a tough life, a life of highs and lows. There was a huge pressure to tour. They'd have buses and they'd just drive all over America, constantly flying. It was just exhausting. It was a life of highs and lows, and the conditions were appalling. The money often was pretty appalling. They got ripped off. Um, so that meant, I guess, that many musicians just lived for the moment, and unfortunately, that often meant booze and drugs.
So the book has got some wonderful illustrations done by Kevin O'Donnell. You can see the front cover there. Tell me about Kevin and his illustrations.
Well, it's one of those strange coincidences in life that Kevin actually is a neighbour and a friend of mine, and I found out that he was a commercial illustrator, and it was quite a coincidence because we were having lunch at a cafe, and they had Hawke's beer on special. So I thought, well, I better have one for Bob in the country. And anyway, Kevin said to me, "You see that picture of Bob Hawke on the can? I did that." And then I realized that he was a very talented illustrator. So when I was thinking about illustrations for the book, I thought, well, the photos that are around are normally pretty hackneyed and people have seen them before, and they're also pretty grainy. So I said to Kevin, would you be interested in illustrating the book? And he said, yes, I would. And the results were, as we can see from the montage on the front cover, really, truly excellent.
So what did you set out to achieve in this book?
Well, mainly it was personal. I spent a lifetime listening to jazz, and I had a lot of thoughts about jazz, and I guess I wanted to share them. But the other thing was that I just thought I'd like to write something that was an entertaining and perhaps inducing introduction to jazz for people who maybe knew a little bit about it but wanted to know some more. And I also thought, those with an appreciation of the music might find some of the things I had to say interesting. And I'm gratified to say that most of the feedback I've got is pretty good. And what I really like is people who sort of say, I knew a bit about jazz, but I really loved your book. So, that gives me a lot of pleasure.
So I'm not a jazz listener. So would you recommend it to me?
Yeah, well, I would recommend it. It's as I say, it's been a lifetime addiction to me. As I said, I started with rock, which at the time I thought was just fantastic. Some rock I still like, but some I listen to, and I listened to an old Rolling Stones album the other day that I thought was fantastic in the 70s, and I couldn't get over how stiff and unimaginative the rhythm section was. And I thought, well, I've been spoiled by jazz, I guess. And as I said earlier, some pop music has a memorable tune, which is great, but it's not much more than that. But with jazz, you can keep coming back to it. I mean, on a basic level, the best jazz, say the big bands like Benny Goodman and Count Basie, have incredible power and drive. And I think anyone would kind of tap their foot to that sort of music. I do tell the story in the book about Benny Goodman's Carnegie Hall concert, which finished with a famous version of a song called Sing, Sing, Sing. And anyway, this friend of mine in those days who was driving taxis did a cassette recording of it, and he played it in his taxi all night when he was driving around. And he said to me, every customer that got in said, wow, that's fantastic music. What is it? So, there's that basic level where it really just does swing. But jazz is a lot more to it than that. I mean, there's low tempo jazz. Jazz swings at low tempos. You get impressionistic piano playing like that of Bill Evans. And the other thing is that jazz has depth. I think that you can keep listening to the music. Like I've been listening to it for 50 years, and I'm still finding new things.
Terrific. Well, you've been listening to David Clune, who's speaking about his book, Jazz A to Z. It's available on Amazon or your local good bookstore.